Last night I was watching Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, and I wanted to ask you, do you think villains are actually born evil?
Honestly, I don't think most of them are. I think they're made. Like, nobody just wakes up one day and decides to become the villain for fun.
And the more you look at villains in movies and books, the more you realize a lot of them started off as normal people who were ignored, rejected, manipulated, or just pushed too far.
Which is kind of uncomfortable because then you start realizing that society usually plays a role in creating the very people it later fears.
Right, like we love the idea of a tragic backstory until it starts looking a little too realistic.
And what's even weirder is how differently we think of vigilantes and villains. Because technically speaking, both break rules, both use violence, both think they're right.
But one gets dramatic theme music and fan edits, while the other gets slurs.
Exactly.
So, today we're talking about villains in pop culture, the psychology behind them, and whether society creates more villains than it admits. Because honestly, some villains are a lot easier to understand than people are comfortable with.
Which is where I want to start. There has been a recent trend that shows that people are justifying the acts of certain villains.
I think people connect with modern villains because they actually feel human, unlike older villains who were just evil for the sake of being evil. Now, their motives, loneliness, rejection, grief, anger, or even revenge feel real and relatable.
Which is why people sympathize with characters like the Joker. People don't necessarily support what they did, but they understand why they became that way. And I think that also scares people a little, because if a villain feels relatable, then suddenly evil doesn't feel distant anymore.
Exactly. It forces people to admit that sometimes villains are created through circumstances, not just personality. Like, take Anakin Skywalker. He didn't start evil, he started scared. And then that fear slowly turned into obsession and control.
Which honestly happens in real life too. A lot of harmful people aren't born hateful, they become hateful through isolation, insecurity, anger, or constantly feeling powerless.
And society does contribute to that in some shape or form. Like, we glorify emotional suppression, especially for men, and then act all shocked when people express their emotions in unhealthy ways.
Or the internet. It was made to reward outrage more than understanding now, because kindness gets allocations, while anger gets views and cruelty gets engagement.
And still, people wonder why anger spreads faster than empathy online. And then there's vigilantes, which is honestly the weirdest category to me because vigilantes are basically socially approved criminals.
Exactly. Like Batman is technically breaking laws constantly, but people excuse it because he targets criminals.
Which raises the question, if the audience agrees with your actions, does that make you a hero instead of a villain? And who even decides that line? Because one person's vigilante is another person's threat.
Honestly, I think the difference between a hero and a villain is usually perspective and public approval. History kind of proves that too. Society often forgives violence when it benefits the majority, which is why characters like Robin Hood are remembered as heroes even though they were technically criminals.
Whoa, this is just as interesting as it is uncomfortable. As we can see that some villains are hurt, ignored, radicalized, or just convinced that what they were doing was justified. Much like a lot of us.
The strangest part is how thin the line between a hero, vigilante, and villain really is. Because most villains believe they're justified. They think they're fixing something, protecting themselves, or taking back control.
And honestly, society plays a bigger role in that than people like to admit. Rejection, loneliness, humiliation, violence, pressure, and constantly being unheard, those things change people.
That doesn't excuse harmful actions, but understanding someone's pain and supporting their actions are two very different things. Sometimes villains are just a result of problems society ignored for too long.
And maybe that's the uncomfortable truth behind most villain stories. They usually start long before the actual crime or destruction happens. So maybe the real question isn't why do villains exist?
Maybe it's what's creating them,
And on that slightly concerning note, thank you for listening to the Villains VR team.
where we probably just defended half of pop culture.
And maybe expose society a little in the process.